Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. It's my privilege to have as my guest Peyton C. Bud Clark. Now that's just a name, like any other name, except that it belongs to a very unique individual who is the great-great-grandson of another unique individual, Captain William Clark of the Lewis and Clark Expedition. You're doing all kinds of cool educational things around here. I want to welcome you to Omaha, or back to the area. You were here last summer.
Last summer with our group, the Discovery Expedition.
As you sort of you're retracing the steps, of course, of Lewis and Clark.
We were literally moving in the footsteps of the original Corps of Discovery.
So just to bring everybody up to date, you started in St. Louis, roughly. There were other things you did, but you started on the Mississippi River 200 years to the day at Lewis and Clark and the group, the Corps of Discovery. And you went down the Mississippi, you met the Missouri, you came up the Missouri, you were at Brownville and
Right. Well, starting at the Nebraska line, I think we visited all the communities below and above Omaha, Nebraska City, Bellevue, Decatur, just some of the ones that come to mind, and had wonderful stops in each and every one.
Oh, people here enjoyed you. The Belle of Brownville was
right.
Going up down the river.
I think that was our first stop in Nebraska. Yeah.
Well, I want to say that what you did is you went all the way up to what was then known as Fort Mandan.
Right.
Where Lewis and Clark and the crew wintered in what, 1804?
1804, 1805.
So then you're taking a break.
We did. We took a break over the winter. We will be back at Fort Mandan on the 5th, on April 5th. Establish our encampment. We'll have an event there on the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th, and our departure will be 200 years to the day. The afternoon of April 7th, our two pirogues will proceed on upstream.
Those are
those are the smaller.
The smaller craft.
Think of it in terms as a big French-style canoe.
Okay. For people that go, what's a pirogue? Was it Ross pirogue?
Right. The red pirogue is 41 feet, good-sized boat, and the white boat is 39 feet.
And then you're going to send the keel boat back.
Keel boat turns downstream, as it did 200 years ago, and we proceed on upstream.
For the hard stuff, theoretically.
I think it'll get especially difficult above the Great Falls, because we'll make the transition into dugouts, and we're very concerned about the low water. We're under drought conditions, so we're concerned about whether there's going to be enough water to float those boats, or perhaps we should be fitting them with wheels, I don't know. But we proceed on in any case. And
you've told, you visited a number of students in the Omaha area this week.
Right.
Boys Town, St. Bernard's, the list goes on and on. You're visiting some other groups and doing a speaking stint for the Douglas County Historical Society. But what you are passionate about is educating and sort of filling in the gaps that maybe us regular folks that don't study Lewis and Clark don't know.
Yeah, well, and our group is all about kids. I mean, we're really committed to students visiting our encampment, and when that can't happen, visiting the schools and the communities that we stop at. And as I told the kids at St. Bernard today, part of really appreciating the story of Lewis and Clark is learning to kind of look between the lines as we read the journals. And the subject we were kind of deep diving today at the school was the littlest soldier, Clark's.
The very littlest soldier.
The very littlest soldier, Clark's little dancing boy, Pomp, who Captain Clark became just absolutely devoted to that little guy.
We better explain where a little toddler or a small infant and then a toddler came into the picture.
And one of the things that we emphasized with the kids is that it's unparalleled, it's unprecedented in military history or in the history of exploration to even consider taking a young girl, the Lemhi girl, Sacagawea, to the idea of having a 17-year-old girl join a military corps on an expedition across the country. It was just unheard of.
Much less.
Much less. And oh, by the way, she just gave birth to a little boy, and he's coming with us as well. And we had a little fun with the subject at St. Bernard. I asked the kids, now, what do you think President Jefferson's reaction would have been if Captain Clark could have picked up his cell phone and reported in and said, well, things are going well here at Fort Mandan, and we're about to proceed on upriver, and oh, by the way, there's a young Lemhi girl that's going to join the expedition with us, and oh yeah, by the way, she also has a newborn infant son. We're going to take him along as
any
well.
female.
Yeah.
And then a young female that's
Yeah.
17 and one with a newborn.
So,
that would.
so again, you know, looking between the lines of the written words of the journals, there had to be something there in the character of Sacagawea. The captains had to have recognized something more than just the fact that she would be advantageous to translate when they hopefully found her people to procure horses. Certainly that's the obvious. Yes, it would be advantageous to have someone that speaks the language. But considering her age and the fact that she had a newborn son, there had to be something much more to her character that they recognized to even consider having her come along. So.
Now the son had a given name, but then he had a nickname which you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, his father's name was Toussaint Charbonneau. He was a French trader that had been living among the Earth Lodge villages, the Hidatsa and the Mandans, for a number of years. And the little guy's name was Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. But Clark affectionately named him Pomp. And he also referred to him on more than one occasion as my little dancing boy.
Now this wasn't derogatory. He used that term again.
He did.
Later.
He did. His youngest son, Jefferson Kearney Clark, was later known as Pomp. So it was
definitely an affectionate.
It was a special affectionate term with Captain Clark.
So the thing that I think, watching you at the Boys Town high schoolers, is that you're not. Reading between the lines is maybe too strong or too weak a phrase. What you did is basically you said this woman and this child, in your imagination and probably in reading between the lines, added total new dimensions.
Absolutely.
To what was going on.
Absolutely. And you know, if we use our mind's eye to not only read between the lines, but to look between the lines and picture, you know, the Corps of Discovery at Fort Clatsop, the winter of 05-06, where
that was the horrible,
miserable. It hardly ever stopped raining. The fleas were so horrible that they had difficulty sleeping. Game was very scarce. There was poor elk at best, hardly fit to eat. And certainly it had to be an all-time low, or potential all-time low, for the morale and the spirits of the men. Okay? So if we take Sacagawea and the little guy out of the picture and picture the Corps of Discovery under those conditions, the only thing that they're thinking about is home, and they're wishing, in all probability, that they had never set foot west of the Mississippi. And under those kind of conditions, it's easy for us, I think, to appreciate the significance of, after 2 days out hunting, for example, let's just speak hypothetically, you're the Fields brothers and you've been 2 days out hunting, it hasn't stopped raining since you left the fort, you came back with one poor elk hardly fit to bring back to
miserable,
the fort.
sort of understates
Miserable conditions, and the Fields brothers are saying to one another, if I ever get home, I'll never set west of the Mississippi again. And Joseph Fields makes a remark like, when God made these fleas, it must have been in his darkest hour, you know. And they walk into the captain's quarters to report in, and lo and behold, little Brown Eyes look up at him, little Pomp gets up and toddles across the room with outstretched arms, and the Fields brothers' whole world changes. And I think that, you know, with that kind of analogy, with that kind of a look through our mind's eyes, we can appreciate the significance of the mother and child in terms of shoring up the morale and the spirits of the men. I know I can speak from my own experience on my worst day when everything seems to be going wrong and your portfolio just dropped another 20% and you got a parking ticket on your way to make a charitable donation or whatever the case may be. You can walk into the house and your little grandson or granddaughter can come toddling across the floor.
And for momentarily, everything
and
is fine.
Right, everything is
now,
fine.
some historians might listen to you and say, you are romanticizing this to no end.
No, I think that it is understated by historians, and the significance of the spirits of the men and the morale of the men is paramount in terms of the success of the expedition. I think it's kind of, it's a generic issue. It's a key thing with the success of any given team effort. And without that strength, without that morale and the camaraderie that it helps ensure, it would have been a whole different ballgame.
And Sacagawea, I heard you tell the youngsters that was more than just helpful in translation and paving the way and easing the way.
Yeah.
You mentioned a time when a boat was overturning or something.
There was one occasion where her husband panicked and lost his head and was praying to his God to save him.
Because the boat was taking on water or something?
The boat got caught in an unexpected gust of wind, and he was, you could question why was he at the tiller in the first place, because it seems that the journals tell us he was probably the worst riverman on the planet. And he was hired as an interpreter, not as a boatman.
So the woman in the crew did not go freaky and go.
No, she didn't panic. She maintained her cool, and started gathering things that were washing overboard, things that were important to the captains, and keeping her wits about her while she, oh by the way, had her child on her back, wherein at the same time her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, was praying to his Savior to help him.
Interesting little studies that come in the journals. I have an very edited version of human behavior. I mean, you get lots of glimpses rather than just we saw this and we did this. You get little glimpses of real humanity throughout the journals. And you are the great grandson, as we've said, of William Clark, and you've always sort of known. I'm in this, descendant of this great guy. When did it really start to, you've always known it, but when did it really start to have an impact with?
It was, first of all, being born in St. Louis and being aware of my ancestry and aware of, for example, Clark's Memorial, where we buried my grandfather when I was about 6 years old. It was sort of a given. I mean, it was something that was understood, but it wasn't something that changed, the course of everyday life.
We're all given our families. There's so many things that we're just, hey, oh yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah, but certainly it instilled a certain sense of pride, in your ancestry that otherwise, might not have been there. And when the subject came up in school in the course of your studies, when you came on to Lewis and Clark, or William's older brother, George Rogers Clark, and his campaigns, the Revolutionary War campaigns in the Ohio Valley, well, then it became, of course, more significant. But I would say that the majority of the time, I was just like any other kid on the block, preoccupied with baseball and football and
eventually cars and girls.
And yeah.
But there was obviously some point in your adult life, because we all sort of, most people I know, some were born to love history, but there's this turning point in our life where we suddenly get turned on.
Yeah, and it's interesting because one of the high school girls at St. Bernard's today asked that very question. And I had to, it was like true confession time with the kids, because I had to confess that I was a late bloomer.
Into history.
In terms of being a serious student of Lewis and Clark and my ancestry.
Oh.
And it wasn't until actually I had children of my own and started, well, let's put it this way. when you reach a point where you're not living paycheck to paycheck, and you find a little more discretionary time to spend pursuant to hobbies and interests, at that point in time, some of these things start to bloom, if you will. And I probably was in my mid-30s before I became, let's put it this way, before I started to become a serious student of Lewis and Clark. And then in conjunction with a real passion for collecting period artifacts, the swords and military accoutrements and firearms.
We're going to look at some of those.
The two go hand in hand. The places where you find those kind of things, the antique firearms and military shows, are the same places that you find authors and historians to share their knowledge. So it kind of goes hand in hand, the collecting fraternity and the study of American history. So.
Before we look at the artifacts, one of the things that came up in the whole discussion of a bicentennial commemoration was how the Native Americans were going to participate, how things were going to be perceived, and knowing what happened after that during our manifest destiny and our sort of mistreatment, really, of the Native American population. You tell the students, and I suppose other people, that this exploration, this core discovery, and the success, and all the things that came out of it, the journals, the looking at plants, and I mean, a myriad of things, would not have happened without the goodwill of the Native Americans.
That's absolutely true. It's a matter of record in the journals that the Corps of Discovery would not have succeeded without friendly relations with the American Indians. Without their hospitality and their assistance, they would not have succeeded. And perhaps we wouldn't be doing this interview. You might be,
you might
be talking to a descendant of Alexander Mackenzie or the Canadian explorer or whatever. In any case, Lewis and Clark were very fortunate. And to their credit, they were diplomatic, but more so to the credit of the Native Americans and their genuine hospitality and their willingness to share and to trade, that ensured the success of the expedition.
Speaking of trading and speaking of meeting with the Indians, you brought a copy of something that was used by Lewis and Clark in these building these relationships.
This is a Jefferson Peace Medal, and on the front it has replicated bust of President Jefferson. And then on the back side is the Peace and Friendship design, where we see the cross pipe and tomahawk, the clasped hands representing a military officer.
You can see the cuffs are military.
Right, shaking hands, and the other wrist is supposed to be a Native American wearing a bracelet with like an American eagle design on it. It is someone's idea way back east.
Yes,
of
that happens a lot.
Of what the Native
things happen
American,
way back east.
Yeah, someone's perception of what an officer shaking hands with an Indian chief might look like.
So when they held the Council of the Bluffs, Lewis and Clark with the Indians, they would have probably given one of these?
Definitely. It's a matter of record in the journals. At every significant council with the Native Americans, the Jefferson Peace Medals were passed out too. And you know, the one mistake that Lewis and Clark made, they made the assumption that they could determine who the head chiefs were, you know, in other words, status quo, who was above, what chief was above the others. And unfortunately, the Native Americans' cultures and their society didn't always operate the way Lewis and Clark perceived them to. And they were often wrong in assuming that an individual was the head chief, when in fact he might have been a lesser chief, and a greater chief might have been on a buffalo hunt or whatever, you know.
How many times, I'll take that off your hands, how many times have we heard that beads were used In trade, did beads
Many
play a
times.
part in the trade in goodwill?
Well, certainly they did, because if we look at the list of materials that Lewis and Clark procured to help ensure the success of the expedition and help ensure that they would be successful in their trading with the Native Americans, we see that they in fact carried many beads. But Lewis would later lament that he didn't purchase more blue beads.
Blue
and
is
he
big.
made a note of it. It was interesting because he made a note of it, of the significance of the blue beads, and he took many, but not enough, and would later regret it, because when they were on the West Coast, that was what the Native Americans wanted. They were interested in blue beads, and there were times when blue beads would have worked, when things even as significant as a sword or an officer's coat were less important to them than blue beads would have been.
Obviously, then blue is a color that does not occur in their natural bead making or what
Right.
they have to make jewelry or various other accoutrements with.
Right. It's a difficult color to duplicate with natural ingredients.
The dyes they would
Yeah.
use or things like that. Now, speaking of being able to determine status and how maybe Lewis and Clark weren't as savvy as they thought, there was certainly, if the Indians knew about military pomp and circumstance, they would have been able to determine who was who. This is that's the military hat, and this is
Right. This is what Captain Clark's officer's coat would have looked like. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the gold lace and the gold braid on the chapeau de bras, the gold eagle on the cockade, the red feather plume, and the red turnbacks on the coat
that's on the back.
would have been an indication of, or representative of, an artillery officer. Mm-hmm. An artillery officer's dress uniform is trimmed in gold and red. Now, Lewis's officer's coat would have been cut and fashioned exactly like this one, only where this is gold, his would have been silver lace and silver braid,
Representing,
infantry.
okay.
He was captain of infantry, Clark was captain of artillery.
Means one
And
shot
the-
and one walked?
No, they were both foot officers.
And they would have white.
Lewis's
say?
coat, the turnbacks would have been white.
White and silver would be the
White
the
and
key.
silver. Yeah.
Well, but these are just so glorious. What you have on is, I love these, the epaulets, I
Yeah.
guess they're
And
called.
a captain would have worn an epaulet on the right shoulder.
Oh, okay.
Right. Clark's being gold, Lewis's silver.
Now, I want to ask you a question. When you were putting this on the kids, does it have to be like off to the side
It
slightly?
goes cocked over the right eye.
Cocked
Just,
over
ju- oh, just like you had it. You had it right.
Oh, I did?
There you go.
Oh.
Yep.
They didn't wear bangs. I just wanted to put this on so badly.
Yeah, you look pretty dapper there.
Well, yeah, I don't know. But now you have on what would be an officer would wear in the travel, in just the everyday traveling garb, working garb, or
A hunting frock that would be more of an officer or a gentleman's
Gentleman.
class. You know, a cut above, you know, everyday frock that that one of the men or one of the hunters might have worn. Something that representative of what Clark might have carried with him from the Falls of the Ohio.
Now let's point out that this might have appeared to be in the beginning of the trip. Then comes bad weather and winters and things
Right.
wearing out and things molding and mildewing, and there might be something that they might have all been wearing towards the end of the trip.
And
And there were many
And
different
you're-
garbs in between.
You're absolutely right. And at this point in time, 200 years ago, they were in a transition period over the winter at Fort Mandan, where their Euro-American clothing was getting worn out. And yes, they still had linen shirts, and they still had some wool trousers and whatnot, but things were getting pretty tattered and torn, and by necessity, they were replacing their cloth clothing
Little by
with
little.
skins.
Yes.
And when they arrived back at St. Louis in 1806, they were literally all clad in buckskin. So
I'm going
this-
to hold this one up because I think any college student here would love to wear this, but it was not a luxury then, it was a necessity. It's, what do they call this?
It's deer skin,
Gotta
and
find the
it's
neck.
native tanned or brain tanned. It's done with all natural ingredients.
I'm going to hold
Okay.
this up. They can use my
Okay?
camera.
And it's patterned off of a Plains Indian shirt in the Peabody collection that's attributed to Lewis and Clark. And as you can see, it's rather simple. It's
And
basically
soft
two
and
hides put together.
supple.
Yes, the brain tanning process renders the leather much softer and more supple than modern tanning processes.
And it's warm, I bet. I mean, you have other things under it, but
It's warm as long as it's dry.
it's dry. Dry is
Yeah, it
important.
doesn't do well when it gets wet.
Okay, so we've seen, I also want to, one thing fascinated me here, and I'm going to let you show that
Okay.
to that camera.
This is a typical Plains Indian or plateau saddle configuration, and it's fabricated from two slabs of wood, okay, attached front and rear, pommel and cantle, with elk horn forks. And which
Yeah, you
end
get
is
the
open?
horn. You could
Yeah, let's see. This end
the
is pretty
horn
open.
right there. We'll try to
If
keep
we
this all in
look-
the same place so the camera
Yeah.
doesn't jump around.
If we look in the end, we can see the exposed fork from an elk horn.
And the sinew from the muscle of
Right.
the creature was used to sew it up.
They would take rawhide and lash the elk horn forks to the two slabs of wood, cover it with rawhide, wet rawhide, stitch it, and we can see the stitching, with sinew, again taken from the animals.
Okay.
And when the whole thing dried, it was almost like fiberglassing it all together.
Well, we're going to talk a little history here in the Douglas County Historical Society. This is a book you can get for $10 from the Historical Society. You'll see the website. It's Rouleau to Lynch with Lewis and Clark by political science professor emeritus Orville Menard from here at UNO. It's kind of then and now as you go from Rouleau up to Lynch, Nebraska, and then of course the trip went beyond that to North Dakota. I want to thank you. If you had one thing to say to people to say this is the essence of the Lewis and Clark expedition, what would it be? Just one little thing.
That our strength comes from our diversity, and the success of the expedition can be attributed to the diverse group of men that made up the expedition and the help they received from the Native Americans.
Well, thank you, Bud Clark, great grandson of William Clark. It's great seeing you. I wish you and pray for you along your trek. No mildew, no cold, no wet, okay?
Thank
and
you,
no
Carol.
fleas. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining us this week on Consider This. No fleas.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.